Howdy everybody. Welcome to a Wednesday edition of Aggie Horticulture Facebook Live. I'm Monty Nesbitt, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Horticulture Program Specialist, and we're hanging out here today in the Leach Teaching Gardens at Texas A&M University to give you a little bit of what happened to us last week in our landscapes, our gardens, our orchards. We got a lot of concern this week about what to do, what happened, where we go from here. And so we've got a great backdrop of plants to talk to you about today. I'm joined by Skip Richter, and he is County Extension Agent Horticulture in Brazos County. Skip and I are going to kind of share duties today and give you an idea of what you might start thinking about in terms of assessing damage to your horticultural plants, crops, gardens, etc. So we're happy you're joining us. Look forward to the next little half hour. We want to take some questions. You may have some things that you really would like to ask us, and we hope that we can get to those questions here in a few minutes. So I am a program specialist. I deal with a lot with fruits and nuts. Citrus trees, one of my passions, and we got some citrus trees here. They're not looking too happy here in the gardens here at Texas A&M University. We're going to talk more about fruit trees on Friday. What I want to do is kind of get us thinking about this freeze event that just happened. It's in the news. A lot of people are still recovering in terms of their houses, plumbing issues, all those kinds of things. But the landscapes, our gardens, our orchards are close on our minds right now. So we want to begin to talk and think about that. I'd like to share, and my poster making skill stopped in about 5th grade. So can you make a poster as good as a 5th grader? These are some important historical freezes in Texas. One of those is last week, and I'm going to put what happened to us last week, February the 15th through whenever it stopped, to be about the 3rd worst freeze event in Texas history. And we have a lot of other freeze events that have happened, but these are some that kind of rise to the surface in terms of history. Notice Dallas, Texas, 1899 is considered the coldest freeze event in recorded Texas history, 11 degrees below zero. 1989, December, a couple of days before Christmas. I was a young graduate student here at Texas A&M University trying to save strawberry plants during this event. A lot of us have 1989 in our memories. Dallas, Texas, 1 degrees in 1989. And here we are, February the 15th last week at 2 degrees below zero. Folks, that's pretty cold. That's pretty tough on landscape plants, orchard crops, etc. And you can go down the list here. Austin, Texas, 7 degrees last week. Not as cold as either 1899 or 1989. And same goes for San Antonio and Houston. So we just take these numbers, and that's not talking about duration of cold and some of those other things that are associated with a cold event like this. Last week is pretty tough as far as plants being exposed to real severe freezing conditions. So what does that mean? Well, it means this has happened before, and it also means it's likely going to happen again. But we don't know how soon, we don't know the frequency of that. One of the things that rises to the surface in this discussion maybe it's time to rethink and relook at USDA plant hardiness zones. Our average for these cities that I just mentioned, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, are listed here. Zone 8A for Dallas, expected the temperature to be 10 to 15 degrees every winter. 8B, 15 to 20 degrees in Austin, Texas. And that would be the same for College Station where we are today. San Antonio, 9A, 20 to 25 degrees expected low. And then Houston is also the same as San Antonio. If we look at the temperatures we got last week, we've moved from Dallas to, folks in Dallas have become Dalhart, Texas in terms of cold weather. The folks in Austin have become Lubbock, Texas in terms of cold. San Antonio, Lubbock also. And then the folks in Houston, guess what? You just experienced what winters are like in Dallas. Now, these USDA plant hardiness zone maps have some flaws, and they are average temperatures. We know in Texas it's never average here. It sometimes is beach weather in February, and we're close to that this week. Amazingly, it's short sleeve weather here this week. That is a challenge for plants because our averages are made up of all these dynamics. We can't predict that it's just going to get to 20 degrees in Houston every winter. Sometimes it doesn't, and that lulls us to sleep in terms of what we decide to plant. Citrus trees that we planted here in the gardens, and we purposefully planned and provided some input on leaning towards some of the citrus that's a little more cold hardy. So you'll see kumquats here, you'll see satsumas in this planting. Those can tolerate temperatures in the 15 to 20 degree range, and below 15 they begin to have problems. Well, where were we last week? We're in that problem area for citrus plants. The other thing that comes up in terms of these cold events is duration. How long was it below freezing? And that can have an impact on plants that normally would survive. Maybe a zone 5 plant like a rosemary might tolerate that, but subject it to 80 consecutive hours or more below freezing, and that plant may have problems. One of the challenges with this past week was this was a very classic blue norther Arctic cold front, what we call an advective freeze event with a lot of wind and deep masses of cold air. And when that happens, all these plants in a garden environment, whether they're tall trees, whether they're bedding plants low at the ground, they all get subjected to this extreme cold temperatures. Our friends and gardeners in California in a Mediterranean climate don't really get exposed to these kinds of extremes that we get. And so the advective part of this made some of the typical protective measures that we might undertake to protect plants, simply putting a cover, a sheet or a tarp or a piece of plastic over a citrus tree, was not enough protection in a severe advective event. All that blowing, windy, cold air, deep cold air power makes it very difficult to protect plants without a heat source, some supplemental heat within a cover. Your insulating materials became much more important during this past week than maybe they have in some of the lesser freeze events than we have had in the past. So it can be very unpredictable. A lot of you are seeing things you've never seen before based on the duration of the cold. But I'll tell you that a lot of our plants have a critical temperature, and if they hit to that critical temperature, even for a few minutes, it can be enough to cause death that you see in this situation like here. So when will this happen again? Is it going to be 31 years? It's been 31 years since 1989. We don't know. It could be next year. We're not done this winter yet. And we have had, Texas is prone to have some late spring frosts or freezes. These plants that have been burned back and lost leaves and lost limbs, they're going to push. So those that are living, not been killed to the ground and had their roots killed, they're going to push a lot of growth. And when it warms up like we're having here, that push of new growth could happen very, very soon. It could be very accelerated due to the loss of vegetation that we've had due to this past cold event. That would really set us up for a, and I don't even want to breathe the words, a March the 10th event, or I don't know when Easter is this year, but we're not even safe at Easter in Texas. We know that from past history. There is, with this understanding, what do you do about future plant selection? Well, the USDA plant hardiness zones are there for a reason. And so we can't grow citrus in Dalhart, Texas without having it in a greenhouse that has a heat source in it. Same with some of the landscape plants and bedding plants. It may be time for us to review these hardiness zones, and are we growing the things that are appropriate? We don't like to make gardening a lot of straight lines. Should be fun, it should be enjoyable. So I don't want to discourage you because you've lost your first citrus tree, or maybe this is the second time or third time. Keep trying, because you may hit a period of time where you have a lot of years between these type of events. There's also opportunity for us to relearn how to protect our plants in these types of events. Learn the difference between an advective freeze event, between a radiational frost, where simply tossing a lightweight sheet, blanket, cardboard box over the top of this tree would provide tremendous help in protection of developing fruit. So this is opportunity for us to think about, do I want to deal with this? Do I want to provide protection to this citrus tree? Not that we lost it in this freak 2021 year that hasn't happened in 31 years. We would expect, if we look at that plant hardiness map, we would expect to need to protect these citrus trees every single year in Brazos County. Now, we don't have to do that because the averages don't work out to make us do that every year. But I have acquaintances and coworkers, and they protect their citrus. They've got a frame, or they are semi-prepared to go in and provide some protection in a last-minute type freeze event where they need to do something. But if you don't like pulling up, if it breaks your heart to pull it out of the ground and throw it away, then maybe a citrus tree is not for you. If you're not going to make that extra step to protect it, there can be real challenges. I have Satsuma tree in Gonzales County on my own little farm. We wrapped it with attic blanket insulation, and we wrapped it up to about a height of here from the ground, and it's in great shape. Now, we threw a tarp over that, and we had a little bit of protection of the foliage. But in these types of severe events, we really want to focus on keeping the plant alive. If I keep it alive, and if I keep the graft unit alive, then I live to grow another day. I live to grow again this year without having to dig up, replant, or replace it. I'm going to let my friend Skip Richter.
We had a question that came in, and it was, bottom line, do we give up on our citrus, or what do we do with the citrus we have now?
Well, one of the things you're going to hear from us today is wait, wait, wait. Plants have a way to try to fight through this and have a bud that appears down here somewhere, and we'll attempt to regrow this plant. You can make 6 feet of growth on a citrus tree like this in a year. The regrowth you can get back is very, very rapid. So don't make a hasty decision. I'm going to let Skip talk to you about the diagnostic part of when you really decide to get the chainsaw out. I was going to bring my chainsaw with me, but I decided that might be a little premature. We want to wait. We want to wait and observe and give these plants a chance. We just need a bud somewhere, and we have latent buds that are buried by years of bark layers, and those can come through if there's some living tissue there, and so don't give up on them just yet. All right, let's move, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Skip Richter and let him talk to you about how do we dig in and find out where these things are alive or dead? I know you know that.
Thank you, Monty. Well, let's talk a little bit about, as we're walking over to another location, the freeze that we just had has been unique in our landscapes, where we have a lot of different microclimates. And I found at my house, plant that survived on one side of the house may not have survived on the other side of the house. There's a difference in species and varieties, for sure. Even varieties within species have looked different. The way that the plant went into the freeze. If you have warm weather and then here comes a cold freeze, it's much more likely to kill the plant than if you had a long cooling period going into that freeze. Another factor is the plant's health. If it's drought stressed or if it's struggling nutritionally and other factors like that, that can also predispose it to being a little bit less cold hardy when that freeze occurs. And I've noticed within the landscape and driving around town and seeing a lot of different landscapes, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You know, when you're out in a large open field, generalizations are a little bit easier to make. When you get into all the mini microclimates, reflected heat, blocking the wind, all the things that happens around our landscapes, it really changes quite a bit. So I want to talk about, first of all, vegetable gardens. I've noticed this year the carrots have really shown. They're the cold hardiest thing we have. Now, if you were far enough north and got cold enough, you probably lost your carrots, at least the tops of the carrots. In my garden, they survived just fine, whereas other things went down. I had some Chinese cabbage. I don't know how appetizing that is, but if any of you want to do some stir fry, there you go. And broccoli. You know, broccoli is one of our cold hardy plants in the vegetable garden. This one was not. These two particular plants were growing in an above ground container, actually a wheelbarrow. I like wheelbarrows because you can roll them into a garage to protect them on a cold night. Unless the night's so cold you're worried about your cars and you fill the garage with cars, this is what happens to your plants. Out in the garden, I threw a piece of plastic over the plants, secured the edges to create a dead air space underneath it, and with the snow cover, the garden made it through. And I would have never expected that, because it's one thing when it dips down for a short time and comes back up. But you know, a week where you're down below freezing, and then we got down to 7 degrees at the house, I was surprised, and I would not even going forward tell people that that would be enough protection, but in this case it appeared to be enough protection. One thing we want to remember is that right now we're in that traffic jam in the vegetable garden where we're going out of winter and coming into spring. March is an awesome month for broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower being produced, but it's also the time when you want to put your tomatoes in, and depending on where you live in the state, it may be early March or late March. Things like peppers and squash and cucumbers are coming in. This freeze may have just made the decision for you. So if I saw plants that were struggling, that had significant damage, my question wouldn't be, can they recover and produce anything? It may just be, hey, let's wipe it clean, get out the rototiller, and let's get our summer garden in, because now's the time we need to be doing that. It's a good time to prepare your soil as well. So we can sort of make lemonade out of lemons by taking advantage of the freeze and getting a head start on the summer garden.
Jeff, I had a question that came
Yes.
in about things like aloe vera and succulents.
Yes, those are mush. We are seeing aloe vera, it's just a mush. A lot of the succulents, some of the agaves as well, have taken a really hard hit. A lot of those plants can produce what we call pups, that's babies from the base. And if the base was protected, even by the snow and the mushy mama plant above it, you may get some resprouts from the base, some pups, and that plant may live. So it's another reminder that what we keep saying, and that is it's too early to tell on a lot of things. We don't want to jump to conclusions unless it's just really clear that the thing is completely gone. Let's talk about perennials and herbs a little bit. This parsley, as you can see, wherever it's stuck up above the snow, it suffered significant cold damage. That's what all these were. They were up here above the snow. Where the snow covered it, down in the lower areas and at the base of the plant, the parsley survived in this particular freeze. You can see the new growth coming back in. So this is the case where that plant is absolutely coming back, and it's worth keeping around. I had some rosemary at the house, and rosemary is not an extremely hardy plant as you move from south to north in Texas. I cut this branch off near the ground, right at the ground, and see the splits that are already forming in the branch? This is something we're going to see on woody ornamentals too as we go forward in the weeks and even months to come, depending on the plant and your location in Texas. But this thing is completely dead, and I probably am going to be replacing that whole plant itself. It had a cover over it, but it just wasn't an adequate enough cover to get the job done for that plant. So check the base of your plant, see if you see any signs of new growth, and give them a little bit of time to warm up. After a few days of warm temperatures, we see more and more the effects of the cold more clearly. Want to talk some about shrubs. One of the common symptoms we've had, like this Indian hawthorn has, is frosting of the leaves, a foliage burn, turning brown. That is not good for the plant, of course. That in and of itself is a sign that our biggest concern. What we're concerned about are the tissues down in the plant. And when we go down, this is an oleander. Oleander is one from south College Station area. We losing our sound here? Okay. Can you still hear me okay? There you go. All right. Once we get into that area, it becomes not a very dependable perennial shrub for us. We have other shrubs that are like that. But if you take a knife and go in to the limbs and branches and get it back, see how instead of a creamy white and a light green or citrus green, you get that pecan brown or paper brown. It's a sign that that branch is dead. So you could continue to do that all the way toward the base of the plant, and you don't see anything, but all the tissues about it are not going to come alive again. If it's dead and it's not coming back. But the base of the plant may still be alive, and we may see some resprouting from the base. Let me just show one more, if I can get you to come back in with the camera one more time. This is a ligustrum, and the foliage is horrible. It's a very browned plant, and when I got back in, again I'll do the cut. As you go back in, you can see that there's some green, but it's starting to turn brown again. This has had enough time with warmer temperatures where we're starting to lose some of that color that we'd like to see underneath. So I would say the jury is still out on this particular plant as to whether or not it's going to come back. I think the plant will survive. We may have quite a bit of disfiguring as a result of that. How's the sound working?
They say it's cutting in and out.
We can try switching.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
I'll just take yours. All right. Now I have two mics. Okay, there we go. All right. Well, let's continue on. One of the things you will be wanting to watch for on your shrubs, your ornamentals, is as we go into the weeks to come, a shrub that may be looking like it's doing okay, suddenly you see a whole branch die out in a boxwood or in a pittosporum or something along those lines. And if you look down the branch, what you'll likely see at that point is old damage and the bark splitting, and the ability of the plant to translate water and nutrients up and down through the branch is hampered, and as a result you just see the collapse of the top. And it's just a longer term effect of that particular kind of freeze happening. I want to walk a little bit this way and just talk about a couple of other things to keep in mind. Here's some perennials. I believe this we've got some Mexican mint marigold here. We've got a little bit of rosemary. The rosemary, just because I know that plant, is probably a goner. This one I suspect may come back from the base. We'll have to wait and see. But if your plants look like this, don't give up on them and don't prune them all back. I know the natural tendency is to want to go clean everything up and make all my pruning decisions now because it's ugly. Well, we need to learn to embrace the ugly. And I'm going to give you a couple of hashtags in a moment here that would like you to take pictures of your plants and send them to us from all over Texas. We want to see what does rosemary look like there? What does particular plants that you grow in your yard look like? But by leaving the top, what we're leaving, it's almost like having a mulch around the base of the plant to some extent. When we do get another cold, like Monty talked about, may well happen for this winter. Am I out again on the mic? Oh, okay. How about that? Is that a little better? When we do get another cold, it would be much better to have the dead cover over the top, or in the case of an ornamental grass clump, that dead grass clump is somewhat of an insulation and a protection that slows the drop in temperature. And even mulching plants over the top can be helpful for that same.
A couple that were asking if you might repeat on the Indian hawthorn, if you could go over there, because the audio was bad and they wanted to be sure that they got the information.
Okay.
Particularly on that one.
Okay. I'm gonna, if you'll just kind of point to the Indian hawthorn here. The point we're making on these evergreen shrubs is just that the foliage burn doesn't mean the plant's lost. In the Bryan College Station area, as you look at the live oaks, some of them look pretty good, and others, it looks like the leaves are about to fall off. They're very browned and a lot of foliage burn, but I'm not worried about loss of the live oaks themselves. I guess we're going to learn this year, because every year we do this, we seem to learn a lot as well. And the other thing I was pointing out over here is when you slice underneath the bark, you can see whether tissues are healthy or if they're turning paper sack or pecan brown like this. That's a sign that we have a problem. And it takes a few days after a cold event, sometimes a couple of weeks after a cold event, to get a good assessment and being able to scratch it back and take a look like that. I just wanted to mention a couple more plants and get Monty back here and do some more question answering. You can see the palms off in the distance there. Those are the Sable Mexicana, one of our native Texas palms, and they are actually pretty hardy as far as palms go. We have a lot of palms we plant here that are not. And Monty mentioned making a decision, like in the area I live, do I really want to try to grow citrus with the things that can happen? When it comes to a palm tree, it's about impossible to protect. And the reason is a palm, most palms have one single bud at the top of the trunk. No ability to sprout. There are a couple of multi-stemmed palms. Most of them that you see are like this. And if the top bud dies, it's just a telephone pole in the landscape. Now you can get all the fronds browning and burning off, and the bud may still be alive, and you'll start to see new growth come out of it. You don't know just because the fronds are dead that the bud is dead. But in the kind of cold we had, if you're stretching the zone with your palms, if you're planting some of the Washingtonias, or certainly the day palms that folks down in Houston and toward the coast are starting to grow some of the feather palms that are much less cold hardy, and that may be the kind of wind that takes those. In general, the palms that are like your hand, are like your hand, tend to be more hardy than. It's a generalization, but it holds up in a lot of cases. So the other example, and since I mentioned palms, I'll mention sago palm or cycad. It's not a palm, but the cycad has had a lot of foliage browning as well. You can lose all those fronds on the cycad or leaves on the cycad, and it can resprout from the top, but it doesn't. Cycads are able to produce those pups like I was talking about with the aloes and agaves, and so even if you lose that trunk, just because you get some pups that are up. So let's give that a try. Okay. And you guys, can y'all hear me right now? Good. If you'll just kind of put into the chat. By the way, if you haven't already asked questions and would like to, Monty and I are happy to answer some questions here as we move forward.
There are several questions about sending in pictures, so if you might want to talk about that and what we're going to questions about that.
Let me mention that. I said I would. We're asking to see what your plants look like, and ugly does not scare us away at all. If you will post to your social media and use the hashtag #LearnToLikeUgly, show us your ugly. How's that one? And AgriLife Strong. Those hashtags will allow us to gather together the pictures from all over Texas, from your landscapes, your orchards, your vegetable gardens, your flower beds, and we want to see what's going on in different parts of the state. This freeze is a learning event for us all, and I mean, I'm learning already. I've been surprised several times, like I mentioned, my vegetable garden surviving. I still don't know quite how that happened because of how long the cold was.
A couple of questions about the palms, and they said it was spotty on the audio. Could you talk about the palms again? What types are more susceptible?
You can go online and learn a lot about hardiness of specific species, but just because something is sold in your area does not mean it should be planted in your area, and that's true from the landscape and the orchard everywhere else. Sometimes I cringe when I see what's for sale in the local stores in any particular area, but the sable palm, Sable mexicana, is a very hardy palm as far as palms go. There are some other fairly hardy palms. In general, the kinds that have a palm leaf like my hand are going to be hardier than the kind that have a palm leaf like a feather. There are exceptions within there. One example would be the Washingtonia that's got this kind of leaf, but the Washingtonia palms are not as hardy as our sables, like the ones behind me here. So if you want to invest in something that's going to take years and years growing in your landscape to be lost in a single night, you definitely want to get something that at least has the best chance of staying fairly hardy for you. Monty, do you want to come in?
There's a question about, what about guava trees?
Pineapple guava.
It just says guava.
Well, there's guava that's tropical, and that's probably not going to make it through what we experienced last week. Pineapple guava, and Tim's going to talk about fruit on Friday, and Tim's grows pineapple guava. Pineapple guava has got a lot of cold hardiness, and I think it's possible that it can survive some of this.
Yeah, come back on way and see the Tim Hartman talking about fruit, and you'll learn a lot more, especially with things like the guava.
One of the things that's happened with this freeze is totally different from 1989 and certainly 1899. We didn't have internet in 1989. We didn't have the number of master gardeners that we did in 1989. We didn't have the number of our botanical gardens, teaching gardens, demonstration gardens around the state. It's a great opportunity to learn what has survived, what people have done in terms of freeze protection methods. We just got to bring all these ideas and experiences together in the next few weeks.
That's true, and we're going to be learning a lot as we go forward. Driving over here, I was driving down a street where there's a long row of the same shrub, and there were two shrubs in the middle of the row that were green, and all the rest were brown. I got to find out why that is, because that's the kind of thing we're going to be learning from.
A lot of people are asking about roses, and what do you do with your roses?
Yeah, we didn't, Joseph, you can kind of show them the roses back over here. We didn't really talk about those a lot, but cutting them the other day, I saw that some of the Belinda's Dream still seem to have good life in them. I haven't looked again, and I'd like to look at after they've had a little bit more time in warm weather. But back here is a Grandma's Yellow or Nacogdoches, and everything I scraped on it was dead all the way down to the ground. Now, whether it will resprout from the base, I don't know. And if your rose is grafted, you don't want it resprouting from the base because then you have a rootstock, or if it's sprouting from below the graft. But if it's own rooted, you might be able to save it that way. That's a technique that people use, Monty, in citrus sometimes, is mounding soil up around the base of the plant. Would you talk about a little bit?
It used to be called banking or soil banking, and we would just heap up the earth. And the advantage of a soil bank is you're heaping the earth, and the earth's temperature is continued up into that bank. And what I described earlier with the attic blanket, it's a great installation, but I don't have the earth temperature in that approach. And banking works well if you're willing to dig, and sometimes it's hard to dig and get up enough to heap up what you need to heap up, but it can be an effective and cheap trade.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And if it's a citrus orchard with hundreds and hundreds of trees, that's one thing. If you got 2 in your backyard or 3 roses that you'd like to protect the graft union on, it's not as big of a deal.
Yeah, and with that, you could walk off and leave it all winter.
Yeah.
And so if you don't like should I go out and do something tonight or next week? Some of these this freeze last week, we know we're in trouble. When those forecasts came, we knew we were going to be in big trouble. We have a lot of lesser freezes where sometimes you're not sure, is it going to get to 21? Is it going to? And so banking can be one of those things where you can set it and forget it, to borrow some infomercial adage.
Several people were asking about, so when do we fertilize now? What's the story on that?
Fertilizer needs to happen when there's growth, and so you want to wait until you're experiencing new growth. Right now we've got a lot of water logging. These soils are really, really wet, and that's a bit of a challenge. We don't want to start irrigating until we begin to dry down, because that's going to add pressure to these plants. Some are suffering a little bit from just being inundated with a lot of moisture.
There's some on East Texas have talked about asking about azaleas and magnolias. Any feedback on those?
The southern magnolias that I've seen look fine, and we even have is that a little gem? This one here, that's a dwarf type, and it looks pretty good in its condition. Then there's the deciduous magnolias, and those are very cold hardy. Magnolia stellata and Magnolia, is it the tulip magnolia? I can't think of the proper name for it. But those kind of magnolias, you'll see those going, all the way up, all the way north into the Midwest, Washington D.C., and all kinds of places.
A couple of questions about bulbs. They were really beautiful, and now they're a brown, mushy mess.
Yeah, bulbs underground are going to be fine, and you may lose the top, and the lack of foliage to replenish the bulb, it's using stored energy to grow more foliage. It may affect the bloom cycle. Maybe it doesn't produce enough carbohydrates and store them for the rebloom. We've got summer blooming, fall blooming, winter blooming bulbs, so it's kind of hard to generalize, but I wouldn't worry a lot about bulbs. Now, sometimes when we say bulbs, we really are referring to bulbs, corms, and rhizomes. And so if you've got white butterfly ginger, the hedychium, and it's growing that rhizome up pretty close to the surface, it's in a lot of trouble unless you mulched it really, really well.
One question, is there a way to see if the plant is alive below the ground, something similar to the scratch test you did above the ground?
You could do the same thing. I find when I go below the ground, and Monty, you may correct me on this, but as I go below the ground, I just see the creamy when it's healthy, not the green.
Yeah, we're not looking for green color in root tissue, but you can kind of, as Skip mentioned, you look for kind of starchy. Think about real nice potatoes that have a whole lot of starch when you get them out of the grocery store. You're looking for that kind of light, creamy, turgid, limp and brown throughout is not a good sign. But again, unless you're going to dig all those roots, they may have somewhere that it just needs a few to recover from.
And many of our plants are able to sprout from away from the crown or base of the plant from the root itself. We're trying to cover everything about cold damage today, and there's thousands of plants we could be talking about, and each is a little unique in its own way.
And the other thing we want to mention is we're going to have a long game to play here. The warm temperatures we're getting now put some pressure to accelerate the manifestation of this. But when it gets to July, there's going to be some shrubs that don't make it then that were okay, and the scratch test and all that showed they were fine, but there were damage in areas on the stem. Their ability to move water is compromised, and they scorch, wilt, and give it up. So this will not be over and done with for a while yet, as far as what exactly survives and doesn't survive.
The condition of the plant going into cold is so important. We've both mentioned that before, but when you think about a plant itself, let's say, I don't want to get into fruit trees, that's coming on Friday, but we talk about this with fruit trees often, but it could be a young landscape tree with thin bark. If you look at the end of the day, the late warmest part of the day, the sun is really low in the sky, shining on the southwest side of the plant, and those tissues can be warmed up, and then when the freeze happens that night, those tissues are more cold sensitive, more susceptible to freeze injury than the tissues around the other side of that same stem on the same plant, and we call that southwest injury. And we often talk about it with fruit, but I was walking around a beltway in a city this summer, and I noticed all the young trees had bark splitting near the bottom of the trunk on the southwest side, and that's exactly what happened there. We got so cold that we had southwest, northwest. We could have every kind of injury in the world, but that still is a factor, and going forward, it's something you ought to be aware of with your young thin bark trees.
Yeah, that's right.
Several are asking about trimming crepe myrtle, and a couple of questions on redbud.
Well, the redbud I've seen so far are fine here in College Station. I suppose we could get some cold damage, and as you go further north, again, this is a learning experience for all of us. I haven't seen any that had pushed out so early that those blooms have been damaged by the cold. They still seem to be in a pretty hardy state. A lot of our native plants, they understand that winter can be erratic. Pecan's one of the latest ones to wake up and leaf out in the spring, and that's a good thing for the survival of a plant like that. Other things that are pushing out early, if you planted a tree that tends to bloom real early, you may have some serious problems.
Yeah, deacclimation happens faster than acclimation. We think with citrus it takes 400 or 500 hours. Temperatures down in that chilling range of 35, 45 degrees for them to gain acclimation, but they lose it in 80 hours. I mean.
And by acclimation, you mean that they're ready for a good hard cold spell.
Survive a cold temperature experience is gained much more slowly. It's lost very, very rapidly. And so Texas, if you look at Dallas experiencing what Dalhart did, and that's not much different than Louisville, Kentucky. I mean, there's a lot of plants that we're growing down here that are having trouble, that they're not going to this winter because they've had a much more deep, consistent winter. And this type of weather we're having today starts that deacclimation process. And so all of these questions are really hard to answer as far as what the final outcome is going to be.
So your take-home point for folks is what?
Wait and learn. Learn what happened. Make notes of what happened, because I think we
that's the take-home right there.
Yeah. Wait on fertilizer. Wait on making pruning decisions, wait, but make notes of what happened, because this is a great learning opportunity of what did well in Brazos County, and the experiences are going to be different for gardeners in the Dallas area. We learn a lot from tragedy, unfortunately. hurricanes, climatic disasters are great opportunities for us to rethink. I know all of our commercial people, nurserymen, orchardists, vineyardists, they're all rethinking, are we got the right variety in place to go forward with? And we can apply the same principles to home landscaping and gardening.
And I guess another thing we learn is there's steps we can take that help. You know, it's not like if you cover your plants with plastic, they're never going to freeze, but it helps. If you mulch the base, it helps. If you acclimate your plants by not, you know, we have plants like figs and the yellow bells, Esperanza, the Duranta. Those are all plants that are hardy in South Texas, not hardy up in Dallas, and then through a lot of the state we can grow them, but the winter often will take them down. Those aren't plants we ought to be fertilizing and watering a lot in September and October, pushing succulent new growth. Monty was talking about the acclimatization. You may have to say the word for me. Acclimation. Process. That's another thing that we can take home and learn. So a plant that has already been killed, it's too late to save it, and with some of them we're going to see them going downhill. At least we can learn so we garden better and smarter in the years to come from the things that we learned from this freeze.
Several people are asking about the hashtags. If you could explain how those are going to be used, and
okay,
where we can search for them and where to post them.
Right. So AgriLife Extension has 3 hashtags out. The Learn to Like Ugly, Show Us You're Ugly, and AgriLife Strong are 3 hashtags that if you will use those and attach them to pictures of your plants wherever you live in Texas, if it's survived without any damage, let's see a picture of it, what plant is it, and when we start getting that kind of collection of images from all over the state, we're going to begin to learn more and more to help us make better recommendations. I could see it affecting future publications and recommendations that we make. Certainly those of us at the county extension level would learn in terms of what does well in our county and what we need to be recommending to folks.
So
Every year
use the hashtag and list the name of the plant. And
name of the
where
plant
they're from.
with your picture.
With your picture would be great.
Picture of the plant. If you want to be in it, that's cool, but you don't have to be. The plant. We know you were inside and warned.
And Monty, could you speak to what's going to be covered Friday on the fruit, and then also turf is going to be included Friday
Yes.
at 4. So
Yeah, so Harmon is gonna walk you through a collection of different fruit plants. Fruits, it's kind of near and dear to people because when you lose it, often you got years invested in that development of that plant, and they're grafted. You simply cutting them off, growing them back from the root system. Sometimes you lose the grafted part of the plant, and so we really get worried about fruit plants. And Tim's going to walk through a number of different species on what he thinks happened in this area. We've seen peach trees that are completely dead, mature trees dead from tip to base. They leafed out, expended a lot of energy, and they're just completely stone dead. And we've got others that were dormant, not doing much, and they're ready to bud out. So it's a real dynamic situation, and Tim will kind of walk you through kind of what Skip did, a little more detail on the fruit side.
okay, and then Friday at 4.
Friday at 4, the Green Aggies? Chat with Green Aggies is going to be put out for the general public, and there'll be specialists from turf and plant pathology, horticulture, and others that are going to talk about the cold and what they've seen and what you might expect. We haven't talked about lawns today, for example, and there's some things we can learn about lawns as well. So Friday at 1 for Aggie Hort Facebook Live, Friday at 4 for Chat with Green Aggies.
And you can find the info on Aggie Horticulture.
On Aggie Horticulture, right.
One last question. There was a question about vegetable transplants. Do we get them in the ground now? Should we wait? What do we do?
If you're a gambler, you can plant a lot of things now and just be ready to cover them or lose them and replant them. That's kind of up to you. If you are so conservative that you wear a belt and suspenders, then I suggest that you wait until about mid-March in the central part of the state to plant your tomatoes. And as you go further north, a little bit later, further south, a little bit earlier. But our last average frost date here in the Bryan College Station area is about February 28th now, based on the last 20 or 30 years.
Here, where could they find that?
I'd call your county extension office. Your county extension office should know. They should know the average frost date. You can also go online. The National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, this Office of the State Climatologist here on campus at Texas A&M has data as well.
Okay. Very good. Thank y'all.
All right, thank you.